It is Women's History Month, and we are celebrating it all month long here at Solarity Credit Union. I'm Jackie LeBrack, Communication Strategist here at Solarity. And this is actually our first video podcast in a series that we're doing all month long that celebrates the contributions women make here in our organization, of course, and beyond. There is no better person to start off this series than our president and CEO, Mina Worthington, on this International Women's Day, no less. Hi, Mina. Thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thinking about Women's History Month, what does it mean to you?
Well, I think it's a time to reflect on the fabulous contributions that women have made to the founding and prosperity of our nation. I think that it's also time to recognize that there are many women who blazed trails so that I and all women could have the abundant opportunities that are available to us today.
As you mentioned, this month honors the legacy of women who really made it possible to have the kind of society we live in today, for us to be having this conversation, right? Where it's possible to be the president and CEO of a credit union with more than $1.3 billion in assets. What made you decide that you wanted to lead a credit union someday? And when did you realize that you really could rise to this level?
When I graduated high school, I needed to get a full-time job, and my first full-time job was at a credit union where my mom was a member. And the CEO of that particular credit union was, in fact, a woman. And I think that is when I realized that I too could be a credit union CEO. I didn't recognize that at the time, frankly, or make the connection that oh, she's a woman there, and I'm a woman, therefore I could have that job. But
Right.
what it says to me, and it really puts forward in my mind, is that we have this great need to have people who we recognize in roles of leadership. It makes it really abundantly important to me and recognizable to me that diversity in leadership roles is critical to the future of our businesses and institutions, so that people can see people like them in those roles.
That makes sense. What were the keys to your success? What do you credit with it? How did you do it? How did you get to this level? It's not like you just decided to be CEO one day.
Well, I know the key to my success has always been seeing no limits. I have never felt that limitations were something that I had, and I think that sometimes our limitations are a function of our mindset. I know that I saw my mother and other women around me suffering from their lack of financial resources and the inability to separate themselves from male partners because of their dependence upon them. And that gave me a lot of motivation to become financially independent. Um, the keys to my success were tenacity, working full time, going to community college at night when I graduated from high school, staying in my parents' home so I could afford tuition, and just sort of the grit and bearing through it, and then transferring to university and going to school year round so that I could get through it a reasonable amount of time. Still took 5 years working full time, but it was definitely a key to my success, just staying tenacious about it. And then when I first started looking for a new job, I just started I just started printing off resumes and sending them to larger credit unions. At the time, about a $200 million credit union was considered a large credit union. And so sending resumes, I went on several interviews, and then finally landed a job in the region. And I just, again, just pure grit, tenacity, and not giving up.
When did you know, though, that you would be a CEO one day? Like you said, you didn't know that it was an immediate apparent, when you started working at that credit union. When did you know?
It was, I guess, a recognition that I knew I wanted to have a job where I could be, where I could make good money. I knew I wanted to
Hmm.
have a job where I could to create my own financial independence, and I knew I wanted to be a job I felt like a leader. I always felt like I had this ability to sort of see things that other people didn't see, or to take risks that other people wouldn't take, I guess. And so I decided, well, I this credit union thing seems to be working out for me, and she's a CEO, and she's not necessarily that special, so I guess maybe I can,
I'll do that
I,
too.
I could do that too. So it was just, and I mean, I was literally probably 19 or 20 years old, so I was not very mature in terms of life experience at the time,
Right.
but yeah, I mean, it became really clear to me that that was what I wanted to do.
That's really neat. Can you think of a time in your career, perhaps earlier in your career, where gender bias showed up, and how did you handle it?
Well, I started work, my first full-time job in 1990, and the 90s were a different time. And I think that any gender bias that I experienced would have been in the form of, potentially inappropriate comments or jokes at work. But I do not ever feel like that the men that I worked for held me back in terms of responsibilities or promotions. Um, I, I've I have seen that men often surround themselves with very competent women who are very productive and get a lot done for them.
Get it done. Absolutely. And speaking of workplaces, we know this because we work for Solarity and we are making strides in diversity, equity, and inclusion. What specifically can you talk about that our organization is doing to support women who want to grow in their careers and potentially take on more leadership roles?
Yeah, it is very important to Solarity's management team and board of directors that we have more diversity in our leadership roles. And so what we've experienced when recruiting for executive and board openings is that can be very challenging to find individuals with diverse backgrounds that have the type of experience that's needed for the position. So, and particularly I think in the financial services space, which has been largely sort of dominated by white men. And so at the leadership level, we've been trying to, at the management and VP level, hire more women into those roles and people of color into our supervisory and management roles so that we can then develop them. We have individual development plans to help develop our management for next level. We also offer tuition reimbursement for education and conferences and other sorts of things. And finally, our training department is developing a full management curriculum for 2024.
Really cool. And you mentioned it early on in kind of that little segment that you just talked about, but there are still far fewer women than men in C-suite positions. I think the statistics about 81% in financial services, men compare, so 20% of women. What advice do you have for women who, maybe like you early on in your career, they see themselves in this role, but maybe wonder if there is a path forward for them?
I believe strongly that if you want it, you can make it happen. And Sheryl Sandberg said in her book Lean In, I believe that sometimes we really are our own worst enemies in that regard. And so what I would say is that if any woman aspires to rise the ranks in an organization, then she just needs to put herself out there to do that. And I feel like we let the doubt and the guilt and the false narratives hold us back. And that's on us. And we need to find a way to get past that.
You just mentioned her book. I just recently read How Women Rise, which is another great book. There are all these books about women rising in the workplace, taking leadership roles, but there tend to be these themes, right? Like not taking credit for our work, being a yes person. We really need to lead up or potentially delegate. You can really go on and on. So a lot of people call them pitfalls. So how do women, in your view, avoid this?
Women fall into them and men do not, right? And so I think that it's a function of how women are raised versus how men are raised and how society tells us women are valued. And so I think that the patriarchy tells us that women are valued for being nice and accommodating and nurturing, good girls. And so my advice to those pitfalls is to not buy into that, to stop caring so much about what other people think of you, to thicken up your skin.
So easy.
I mean, it's work. It's personal
Yeah.
work. I was told also by my mother as a little girl, you're bossy. If you're going to be bossy, you're not going to have a lot of friends. And I just made the decision, well, I guess I won't have a lot of friends. And that's where I went with it, right? And so I grew up with sort of the, I don't have a lot of friends, nobody likes me, little gremlin on my shoulder, right? And there are other examples of women in the organization. I've talked to specifically some of our vice presidents about this. The other one is being too nice and not necessarily garnering the respect, right? And not being able to make decisions. And so I think what you have to do is you have to thicken up your skin and realize that no one is going to appreciate it when you advocate for yourself or outdo them at work. They're just not, and they might not like you. And you need to decide that it's better to be respected than liked.
Yeah, I think that's a tough one, but I think you're right. Like just dig in and like you said, it's work, work on yourself.
And understand if somebody doesn't like you because you're doing a great job at work and you're advocating for
That's
yourself,
on them.
About you. That is nothing about you.
Yeah,
Right.
it can't be about you. Absolutely. All right. Well, this has been amazing. Any final thoughts on this International Women's Day?
Well, I predict, and I'd love to see that this, before my time on this planet is ended, we'll see a substantial shift. I think a substantial shift from sort of male-dominated leadership of government and businesses to greater equality in businesses and organizations between men and women. And I think that in order for that to happen, women cannot sit back idle and wait for it to happen. They must take action. And I think that I'd like to just say you must take your opportunity to walk through open doors and at times push through a closed door to open.
I love that. That is wonderful, wonderful parting advice. Thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time to chat today about Women's History Month. It's always really fascinating to hear about your background, and we'll have more of these chats coming up this month, which I'm really excited about. And thank you for all the viewers and listeners for tuning in.
Thank you for taking the time to do this, Jackie. I really appreciate it.